It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Woden Yan.
Okay, so in terms of advice, there's quite a few things I'll talk about here. One are just like useful resources. If you haven't already, you should create a Codeforces account, just because there's so many problems out there. There's just the pure mass of different problems that you can try your hands at and try to solve. They also have cool things where you can actually sort the problems by rating of difficulty. You can sort of figure out, what sort of problems are perfect for you, and then slowly see your difficulty level increase over time. Again, Competitive Programmer's Handbook, great read if you haven't read it already. And then more recently, actually, there's a site called the USACO Guide, and this is very new. It's actually created by some of my friends who I went to camp with a couple years ago, and they worked with Brian Dean. They worked with Benjamin C, who is like the #1 in the world in competitive programming right now. He actually goes to school down the road at MIT. And I think it's a great resource. It categorizes the sort of different techniques and strategies into different buckets, and literally you can click on topics such as like topological sorts, and it'll bring you to problems that test that knowledge for you, or you can practice on. It sorts them by rating of difficulty, so you can do bronze level, you can do silver level, gold level. It's tailored almost perfectly to, I think, what a modern person training for USACO really needs. In terms of practice style, I think this is something that everyone always worries about, and there's never really a perfect answer to this. People always wonder, like, how long should I try a problem before I give up and look at the solution? Or, how many problems should I be spending each day? Or how many hours do you dedicate a week to this? And these are very common questions to ask. My thought process on this, and I actually got this advice from competitive programmers who came before me. Definitely don't just look up the answer to the problem as soon as time runs out. Time shouldn't be your main determinator of whether or not you give up on a problem and solve it. It's sort of more about if you're working on a problem for a while and you feel like you're actually just stuck, like you don't have any ideas, period. There's no new insight you've gained thinking about the problem for the last hour, then you can maybe look at the solution, because then there's a chance that the solution actually uses something completely new that you've never seen before. But as much as you can, really push yourself through that sort of difficult period of thinking about, what do I need to do this? So a lot of the process of getting good at solving these problems or just building these problem solving abilities is a lot more than taking your knowledge of algorithms and applying it to a problem, because the difficult sort of gross path your mind wanders around to get from the problem to the ultimate solution is a path that through going through that difficulty multiple times and understanding what mindset you have to keep yourself in to go through that difficult period, that itself is something you're learning. And that's a learning that you don't get by just reading about algorithms and data structures. It's a learning you only get by practicing these difficult problems and not giving up until you do solve them. So it's almost like a meta learning where you're learning how to bridge the gap between seeing the problem and the ultimate solution. And you also learn sort of what thinking techniques are best for you. In terms of, do some people like to sort of have a checklist of different data structures that might be useful? Some people like to think backwards, and learning what kind of problem solving, styles you have is a super important part to this. So basically long story short, there's a lot of value you get by just sitting there and trying to think about a problem. Even though it feels like you're wasting your time, it's a lesson that compounds over time and eventually brings you to a point where you feel like you are much more comfortable solving these sort of problems. On that note, always go back to contests you took or practice contests, and don't just say I didn't solve this problem, so it was just too difficult for me. Always go back and continue thinking about it after the contest. Even if you're busy, weeks later you can go back and think about it, maybe have a new perspective, and work on not just giving up there, but again getting those problems that you had approached once and approach them again and again until you eventually get them. And if you don't eventually get it, if you really feel like you're making no progress, reading the editorial, reading the solution at that point, and learning something new from that, and then implementing it yourself is also a big part about learning there. And then the last piece is actually be very intentional about targeting areas which you are weak in. So if you feel like you're weak in dynamic programming, I think it's natural to feel like, okay, I hate dynamic programming, I'll just avoid dynamic programming problems and focus on other areas. Really dig into that. I personally kind of didn't understand dynamic programming for quite a while. And I remember just like, after doing enough dynamic programming problems, at some point it just sort of clicked for me. And from there, it was great. Dynamic programming quickly became one of my favorite areas because I had worked on it for so long and hated it for so long that I had learned, the intricacies of dynamic programming and, what exactly goes into making it work. So definitely try to focus on areas that you're weak. So if you hate computational geometry, really dig into computational geometry. And who knows, because you hate it so much, you may eventually learn techniques that make you hate it less. And then in a way, you'll actually become better at it than most other people. So being very intentional about that. Sort of on that note as well, if you are debugging and you have an error like, oh, I forgot a semicolon here, or I have an off by one error, by +1 instead of -1, or you're doing greater than instead of greater than or equal to, try to remember what errors you commonly make, because it's very easy to say, oh, I just made that dumb error. I'll just try to not be dumb about that again in the future. It takes a lot of intentionality to say, I very commonly make +1 errors. So next time I'm writing my code and I write a line of code that may have that sort of error, make sure to read it twice and ask yourself, okay, I always make errors on this sort of line of code. Let me just read it again to make sure it actually is correct and really think through it. And after doing that enough times, you'll find that that's the fastest way to make yourself stop producing those kinds of errors.